Frodo is an icon of resilience to temptation for the everyday person, but ultimately, he gives in to the temptation of the One Ring. What's crazy is that all of this is a part of Iluvatar's greater plan in overcoming evil. So join Paul Backholer and I as we discuss the Christian themes surrounding Frodo. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the White City Podcast. Today I have a new guest with me, Paul Backholer. And it's good to have you on, Paul.
Thanks.
Yeah. And before we get into Frodo and the Christian themes surrounding him, would you tell a little about yourself and how you got into Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, so went to Bible college when I was young, sort of getting near to 30 years ago now. And that's the first time you start reading things like C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis, very close friend of Tolkien. They were friends for like 30 years. And Lewis and Tolkien would be the ones who would hear the first readings of the Lord of the Rings, the Narnia, the apologetics books. So I really enjoyed going to Oxford and going to see the places of Tolkien, Lewis, going to Lewis's home. Interesting with Tolkien, he lives about 20 minutes walk outside of the main of Oxford, city centre of Oxford. Meanwhile, C.S. Lewis lives about 40 minutes out in what would be traditionally the Shire idea, this little English village, the church, the small homes in the trees. And Tolkien likes to spend a lot of time going to C.S. Lewis's home. There they discuss these Christian themes, the ideas, the myths of that story. So they both believe in the incredible power of sharing their faith through stories. They do it differently. C.S. Lewis believes in a very direct approach where it's very clear in the Narnia Chronicles that Aslan is the Christ figure. Whereas Tolkien says, I want to go on a deeper level. I want to reach a much wider audience. So for The Lord of the Rings, you have the big arc of the stories, the characters, and each person has this big moral choice that they have to make. Obviously, the film adaptations took the books to a much wider audience, and I certainly enjoyed seeing them over and over again.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, so it was like, I guess, were you reading the books then like quite a bit before the movies come out, or
I think I saw the movies first, which is
okay,
a bit easier in a sense because you get a picture. I mean, the difference, Peter Jackson in the movies, he cuts certain characters out, he changes things, he chops it up. So it's a different thing from the book. I mean, the big things that you'll notice at the end of The Lord of the Rings, Frodo and his friends go back to the Shire and it's totally devastated, which Peter Jackson decides that's not going into the movies. It's a different ending. But for Tolkien, that's a really important point because his childhood home is what he sees as the Shire, and it's just outside of the city of Birmingham. And the city of Birmingham just grows bigger and bigger because of the Industrial Revolution. And it destroys basically Tolkien's childhood village and home. All they have left of it is this little mill. So there's all these personal stories that Tolkien is bringing in, including in 1911, as a young man, he goes for a walk in the hills of Switzerland, and then that becomes Frodo's great journey through the mountains.
yeah, no, yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, thanks for those pieces of information and all. Yeah, so I don't really know as much about Lewis and Tolkien's relationship and all those backstories, but yeah, so that's neat. Um, so yeah, let's just get into like Frodo's character, and I guess like the kind of the outline that I gave you is sort of like what I've tried to just focus on like, a lot whenever I'm talking about worldview themes. Um, those four like main points of like universal morality, good versus evil, temptation, and divine intervention. And I think all these things can be found in the story to a certain extent if you're digging deep enough. So when we're when we're looking at like universal morality, right, for Frodo's character, what are like situations he has to come across, you say, that kind of give him moral dilemmas, and where he has to make decisions about, the right or wrong thing to do. Yeah.
Fantastic thing about Frodo is you can go all the way back to the beginning, which is he's living in the Shire and this beautiful village life. And Tolkien is evoking ancient England with their churches. Everybody knows each other. There's a blacksmith. There are poems, there are stories. Even when I was young, we would like dance around the maypole in these ancient villages. It was a part of connecting ourselves to the ancient Shire times. Today we say Yorkshire. In the olden times, it would be Yorkshire. C.S. Lewis and Tolkien live in Oxfordshire. My ancestors come from Devonshire. And so the first big problem for Frodo is, are you going to leave your sort of demi-paradise, your Eden, and go out on a great quest? I mean, that's a huge moral question. He's living in this beautiful world and he's being asked, are you prepared to go to the ends of the world if necessary? At the beginning it's Rivendell, but it becomes much bigger. Are you prepared to go out and risk your life for something more than just yourself? Leave behind the beauty of the Shire and go out into who knows what? And you have the Bilbo Baggins thing where be careful when you go out your front door and start taking a step, because you don't know where you're going to end up. And that is a huge moral question for anybody who wants to follow the Lord. Are you going to willing to step out and move forward? And then as you go on much further, you can go all the way to sort of the Mount Doom situation, where the huge burden and temptation of this ring of power, this system of evil, the desire to completely dominate and control other people, it is wearing so heavy on Frodo. That heavy burden breaks him down. And Tolkien is evoking the cross of Christ there, where the incredible, enormous burden of that weight is upon him. The difference is Christ doesn't give in to temptation, while Frodo, unfortunately, the heavy burden of that ring comes upon him. That's where that brilliant Samwise moment comes, where he says, I can't carry this burden, the burden of this ring, the evil, because it will break me, but I can carry you. That's Simon of Cyrene carrying the cross all the way up. And of course, right at the last moment, they get to the top of Mount Doom and they're about to destroy the ring. And the greatest test of all comes for Frodo. Are you able to destroy this ring? And he fails. He fails on that great test. He cannot. And Tolkien tells us something very interesting about this. Tolkien doesn't stand up and give lectures and say, this is what it's all about, this is what it means. But in his private letters and private conversations with friends, he says this is what it all means. And we're quite fortunate that those people, like his son Christopher Tolkien, decide to tell these stories for the rest of us. So what happens? This is the idea of providence, morality. He fails the moral test, but providence comes in, because if you look all the way back to The Hobbit, there is an opportunity where this creature, Gollum, has that could be killed, but his life is spared by Bilbo Baggins. And all the way forward, we have Frodo saying, I wish he just killed him. I wish he just finished with this evil creature. He's so much trouble. And this is where Gandalf says, hold on a second. I see something bigger happening here. He still has a role to play. And what Tolkien tells us is the mercy and compassion that Frodo shows to this horrible creature Gollum is actually going to play a role in the redemption of the whole story arc, including his own story, because in the end there's a big fight at Mount Doom, and Gollum bites off the finger of Frodo, and it ends up in the ring ultimately being destroyed, and Frodo Gollum being set free from his misery. There's a moment where C.S. Lewis says that length of days also means length of misery, and that is exactly what the Gollum creature experiences. Remember, Gollum fails his moral arc because he gives in to the temptation, and Spiegel becomes the evil Gollum. But Frodo's willingness to show love and compassion and mercy ultimately leads to the situation where Gollum leads them to Mount Doom on paths that nobody else could go on. And so there's that principle of showing mercy and compassion, especially we find this in Christian evangelism. Somebody might be 100% against your message, but by showing that compassion and warmth to them, ultimately, you might find many years later, they'll say, well, thank you very much because you helped me out. And you see multiple cases, situations all the way through Frodo's life where he is rewarded for humility. He's rewarded for perseverance. The easiest thing in the world is to give up, especially with the enormous burden that he is tasked to carry. Tolkien tells us all the secrets of this story in his private letters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have them. I haven't read through all of them. I've gone through
A
some here
lot.
and there. Um, yeah. So, all right. One thing going back to like Frodo, like failing at Mount Doom. Like, do you think he actually failed? And also, do you think that anyone in that position would have taken the ring?
Well, Tolkien tells us, because he says that it is a moral failure. However, he says that the burden of that ring was so great. Bearing in mind, Tolkien tells us that the ring symbolizes the desire to totally dominate and control others. So think of Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin, Mao. Like, I'm willing to kill huge numbers of people to get my goal. And Frodo is just broken down by that. And what Tolkien says is his redemption is because of his mercy. And that's the role of providence, which you've talked about. There's other times where Gandalf, in the famous Balrog scene, where he screams, "You shall not pass," to this evil demonic being. Frodo is there in a situation where he is completely dependent on somebody else to help him. He's without mercy. In the movies, it's very direct. There's this huge demonic power. And there, what happens, Gandalf stands up. And if you translate what Tolkien is saying using all of the backstories that he includes, Gandalf effectively says, I am the servant of the true God, and I stand here by the power of the Holy Spirit. This is the fire, and you shall not pass. The bridge collapses with a strike, and that is Christ saying, I saw Satan fall like lightning. So you see this evil being fall down, but the book of Revelation says there's a sting in his tail, Satan's tail, and that you see how Tolkien invokes that Gandalf is pulled down and Frodo is brokenhearted. You know, this is somebody really great that I need. I can't make it through without without Gandalf's help. But of course, just as Christ goes down into hell, Gandalf goes down, and we have the resurrection. But always remember with Tolkien, he doesn't do direct allegory. So Gandalf is a prophet. He's also an angel. Frodo is a weak human being called out of the Shire, that is evoking the disciples of Jesus being called out of these tiny villages around Galilee in Israel, Judea. And you are going to change the world? I mean, come on, how can you change the world? You're nobody. That's the story of Frodo and his friends, Merry and Pippin and Samwise, these people who support Frodo's journey. But you can see as the journey goes along, the heavy burden of that ring, the evil that's working on them is so constant. And as I said before, our Gollum gives into that ring. Frodo never really does. I think, as you're saying, who wouldn't give in? Well, that test is given over and over again throughout the book. You see Gandalf resisting it, Gladriel's resisting it, other people resisting it. I think the idea of the providence here is that he is given the power by God to carry that burden, just as we are given the power to walk the path that Christ has called us to walk. And we can't walk anybody else's path, but we can be the Samwise that supports Frodo in his great calling.
Yeah, so what do you think is the best evidence to that providential calling in like the book, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I guess, for like Frodo?
Yeah, I I know I've sort of mentioned this before, but I think that mercy and compassion that he is willing to show to the creature Gollum ultimately revolves around the redemption arc. And, Tolkien tells us about the God of the Lord of the Rings, and he mirrors it in terms of the God of this world, the creator of this world, and the importance that all the way through there is this divine hand that is at work guiding and working. And Tolkien is evoking that to our world and saying there's basically like a 7D chess game going on, and we can perceive 2, maybe 3Ds, but there's the invisible realm, there's the supernatural realm. So Gandalf is an angel and sort of a prophet sent to help Frodo on the call. So he comes along, but Gandalf will not fight Frodo's battles. Frodo has to fight it himself in the same way that we can receive encouragement from scripture, we can receive the strength of the Holy Spirit, we can receive a prophetic word of guidance, but you still have to walk the path that Christ has set for you. C.S. Lewis, remember, Tolkien and Lewis are talking all the time for years, so they're filtering stories to each other. C.S. Lewis says, with every decision that we make, we become like a creature that's more hellish in nature or more heavenly in nature, more like Christ or more like the demonic. And that's each small decision each day, we're walking towards God or away from God. This is why repentance is such a beautiful thing, because we can go closer to God. Even if we've fallen, we go back again and retake those steps. And you see that in Frodo, where he's really struggling with the weight of the burden, and he's struggling in the end with starvation. He's struggling with discerning who's his friend and who's his enemy. You can see that in the idea of, is Samwise at the end as they're going up these major steps? Is Samwise trying to trick me here? Because Samwise sees that Gollum is a really evil creature, but as I say, that kindness and mercy helps in the end of the redemption.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's right. And like whenever Gandalf's talking to Frodo about it in the Mines of Moria, at least it's in the Mines of Moria in the movie. I can't remember where exactly it is in the book. It might be in the same place. Um, and he's just telling Frodo about how like it was pity that's caused Bilbo to spare Gollum, right? And then he's also says how like Gollum probably has a purpose to play, you know, in the end. So So yeah, and there's like that whole scene, like Frodo's meant to have the ring. It's also like kind of ties back to like there's like Gandalf's talking about somebody that's a higher being, at least
Absolutely.
than is just in like the regular characters in Middle Earth.
Well,
Um,
Tolkien tells us that this is a very Christian book, or the trilogy. He tells us that the whole story ultimately is a Christian story, and he explains throughout that what happens is he subconsciously writes a Christian narrative about the power of humility, the power of standing up and fighting evil. Frodo could have just said, I love the Shire. I'm staying here. I'm not interested in the wars and the battles of the world. That's like the missionary calling, or just the calling to serve God in your community. Like, I'm not interested. Leave me in the Shire. But he's willing to go out. And Tolkien explains to us who the God of Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth universe is, and how that God mirrors the God of our world, the real God. And he's specific about the idea of myth and true myth, the idea that in every story that there is something of the divine that comes to us from God the Creator, and you take the pearls from all those stories and bring together the good, and they all point us back to Christ. There's this element of, imagine a big lake and you throw a stone in the lake, it hits the center and you get all these ripples. Tolkien is saying all those little ripples are the stories, the myths, but they all point back to this central event that happened. And that central event is the death and resurrection of Christ. All who trust in him will be saved. And so in the world of C.S. Lewis, it's very clear Aslan is Christ, Edmund is fallen humanity, there's the death and redemption, resurrection of Aslan. In Tolkien's world, everything's a little bit more deeper, and he's trying to say there's a deeper truth. What he's saying is, if you make it too direct, too obvious, you may put some people off from actually reading the story. And so the idea is like there's something good in this world and it's worth fighting for. I mean, that's the big conversation between Frodo and Sam. Like, what is the point of all this sacrifice and all this struggle? Why are we doing this? And it's like, and then that's why Sam says to him, Samwise, he says, well, think about this. There's all these stories throughout history about people who had to face these great nightmares, and they could have given up. They could have walked away, but they didn't, because even this darkness right now, it's a passing thing, that there is light at the end of it, that the creation. So all the characters in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien gives them a huge moral choice, and they have to choose the good. And people who fall, many of them are actually redeemed also.
yeah, kind of like a Boromir, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. So with um with Frodo, is his resilience, did you say, against like the ring, like the greatest way that he's like overcoming evil? Or how would you
Willingness
say
to just
he's
keep going,
yeah,
I think,
willingness
is the,
to yeah.
yeah, like you say, the resilient, the willingness to keep going, to keep fighting, to never give up, to never back down. Winston Churchill talked about this idea that uh, the true sort of strength is to go from failure after failure after failure and never give up, because it's so easy to do that. And Tolkien himself wanted to give up writing The Lord of the Rings because Tolkien doesn't believe in simple stories that have no meaning. He believes in the creation of vast worlds, and these worlds have to reflect Our world, he calls the Middle Earth an ancient mythology of England. So before Christianity, which is why there's no churches and prayers, it's before Christianity. It's a bit like the Old Testament as God is revealing himself. And just as like the angel of the Lord appears, so Gandalf will appear to help. But to keep going forward, even though there is so much struggle and strife, and that is a huge thing for all of us to go forward in the call that God has asked us to never give up, and think that we all need a Samwise to help us at one point, because Frodo wants to give up many times. He's been starved, he's been exhausted, the ring has broken his resolve. And so, as you said earlier, like he failed, but also we would all fall in that, under that enormous pressure. And so this decision to show kindness and mercy earlier to Smeagol, who becomes this evil creature, that decision ultimately helps him so much. But just keep going forward, I think.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, I think that's true, yeah. I mean, Frodo was able to make it, that far to Mount Doom. Um, I mean, who knows if other characters would have been able to do that. Boromir, probably not. Um, but yeah, so I think something else I have a thought on too is like kind of Frodo's journey, right? As he goes out, um, has to destroy the ring. Of course he fails, but he comes back. And comparing that to like the classic hero's journey, I guess, right? Where you have the character come out. I feel like they overcome something, right? And when they return home, I think it's like the idea is that they've overcome something and they're at a better place almost than they were when they set out. It's interesting to think about Frodo and how like it's almost like he's at a worse place
That is true.
when he returned. Yeah.
I think what Tolkien is evoking there is World War One, and the Dead Marshes is this important point as well. Frodo, Samwise, Gollum, they go through the Dead Marshes. They see these creatures under the water, and Tolkien is specifically referencing here his World War One experience at the Battle of the Somme, where he sees his best mates killed, and he sees boys his age, 18, 19, 20, having been killed. They are in the mud or under the water, and it's the horror of what's happened to him. And that horror never leaves Tolkien. We know that his son, Christopher, and daughter, Priscilla, say that sometimes Tolkien would explain about the World War One battles and the gas attacks and the effects it had upon him. C.S. Lewis, also his great mate, goes through the same thing. C.S. Lewis awakes in the night in his older years screaming, "Murder, murder." And he wakes up sweating profusely because he's on this endless march that the young soldiers had to do, or going to the front. They would march like 20 hours a day to go to the front through these battle scarred places. Tolkien talks about that. So in the Dead Marshes, the effect, you see in the movie, you see Frodo falls into the Dead Marshes and these evil things try to grab him and pull him down. That's Tolkien saying, the past, the horror of it is trying to pull us down. And Frodo, he goes back to the Shire and it's completely destroyed. And the beauty of Tolkien's honesty is that he says that the scars that have been inflicted upon Frodo are so deep that he can't overcome. He has to like go forward into heaven effectively. He can't just go back to his life on Shire. So he's in a worse place. And you can see that in, imagine being there and seeing Christ crucified. Everybody just goes back to fishing. They're like, well, we thought Christ was going to be the one. and instead we got it all wrong. We're just going to go back fishing now, go back to our normal lives, go back to the Shire, and the tragedy of that is there, and that tragedy continues in Tolkien's heart. It continues in C.S. Lewis's heart, but they believe from that generation, you just got to keep walking forward. Everybody has gone through these horrific scars. Frodo is destroyed by it, but Samwise gets to go back and enjoy life and have the Shire experience again, go back to something beautiful, but they have to go back and fight for it again. So it's a funny thing. I think here's the thing that Tolkien talks about stories. When they C.S. Lewis and Tolkien go and see Walt Disney movie 1938 Snow White, they both decide at the end of it, Disney will never get his hand on any of our works. That seems like a strange thing because there's this great celebration of Disney. But what Tolkien is saying is the sort of turning it into a wonderful family story is not necessarily the truth of the gospel. The horror of seeing the Savior crucified, and the horror that if you follow me in the first few centuries, you too are going to get crucified or killed, and terrible things going to happen to you. Out of the disciples, only John, the beloved, is the one who doesn't die. And they tried to kill him, and they sent him to work in a prison camp underground in Patmos. So one of the things Tolkien is against is the Disneyfication, the idea that you strip the extreme harshness and horror out of life. C.S. Lewis describes it that children are going to meet evil enemies in this world. We're going to see dictators and horrible things. So they need to see brave knights. They need to see heroes. And in the Bible, you need to see the prophets standing against evil, Elijah against Jezebel, because in our real world, we're going to have dictators and horrible situations. There's going to be wars. There's going to be horror. But ultimately, we're living for something bigger than the self. In this world, we're living for Christ and his purposes to serve him. In the Lord of the Rings, it's to serve the greater purposes of defeating that evil so that there can be a time of peace, a time where people are in contact with the Creator. Both C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, they create the sort of creation stories of their worlds, and they talk about the end of their worlds. They talk about the God of the world, the prophets, the priests, the kings. We can see that very clearly in Tolkien's work with various individuals who are like prophets. Obviously, Gandalf. We have the falling angels, effectively Saruman. They're the embodiment of evil and so forth.
Yeah. So there's two things I'm thinking about. One thing is kind of like, Frodo comes back in kind of a worse state, but still there's something better for him afterwards, right? As he gets to go to the Undying Lands. And if, like, eucatastrophe, I guess, maybe something I'm thinking about. I don't know if that's the right place to put it, but it's what goes through my mind, I guess.
The
Yeah.
eucatastrophe idea is a great idea of Tolkien. So he takes the word catastrophe and adds the EU, good, in Greek, and the eucatastrophe is invented. This is very Tolkien and Lewis. Lewis creates supposal. Suppose Christ comes to a world of talking animals. And for Tolkien, eucatastrophe, the greatest eucatastrophe, a horror which turns good, is the death and resurrection of Christ. The greatest horror, the Son of God is crucified, but great good comes out of it. And he sees that all the way through. Ultimately with Frodo, as you say, he goes back, he's in a terrible situation. You can describe this as maybe the pastor, the missionary, or just the individual person who, because they walk with Christ, there comes a cost. You lose your friends, you lose certain things that have destroyed you and held you back have to go. But there's something greater that comes out of that. For Frodo, as you say, going to the Undying Lands, that is heaven is very, very beautiful in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. At the end of it, seeing them sail off to wander, the sadness between the Samwise and the rest of the guys. There's also the wonder where they're honored at the end of it by the new king, the return of the king. The king honors them and everybody kneels before. Who are these people? They're hobbits. They're so small. They're so weak, like the disciples of Jesus, like us. The people that you wouldn't expect to be called to serve for any reason. And yet there is a beauty at the end. In Narnia, it's called Aslan's country, going off. So Reepicheep at the end of the Dawn Treader decides it's better to go off to Aslan's country than to go back into the world of Narnia. And so, in a sense, Frodo is worse off whilst he remains in the Shire, but going on to the Undying Lands, going on to meet the God of his God and enter into his peace. And that's the eternal promise of the gospel. All who put their faith in Christ will be given the keys to walk through the gates of heaven, where the book of Revelation ends. There's no more tears, no more suffering. And the wonder of that, Christ says you'll be like the angels. So there's a transformation of who we are, who we will become. And in the same way, Tolkien is trying to sow the seeds. Lewis, his good friend, describes this as pre-baptizing the imagination, or getting the stories of the gospel past the watchful dragons. The idea that we've built a resistance to the things of God in our lives. So a story opens the door, and there's that very famous part where Tolkien is talking to C.S. Lewis when he's an atheist at Addison's Walk, and explains about the true myth, that the difference between all the stories of the gods that have died and come back again and Christ is that the story of Christ is true. It happens in a real place. Pontius Pilate, we know he was real. The high priest, we know he's real. We've got his ossuary, and it's datable, it's timeable, but all the other stories are preparation to open your heart. So the story of Frodo, in that sense, is preparation that even if you end this life in a huge struggle, and it's burdened you down, and fighting the battle has taken the strength out of you, but there's still the Undying Lands, there's still heaven, there's still eternity, there's a place of peace. And today people are talking about they want to live forever. Well, for most people on this earth, if you're going to live forever, that means you're going to struggle forever, you're going to work forever, you're going to pay your taxes forever. But in the Undying Lands and in our heaven, there is a peace and a wonder that's beyond anything that we understand. So Frodo just brings this incredible story of how he takes the calling given upon him, how he's willing to listen to Gandalf, the prophet, and the angel who is able to help him but not carry the burden for him, and how he's prepared to find a team of people and work with them, where his friends say to him, we're never going to give up on you, even though their paths go in different directions. Samwise is the one who stays with him all the way through. And as I said before, Sam gets to enjoy the benefit of going back to the Shire and having the home life return and the normality, but Frodo gets eternity in bliss.
Yeah. So another thing with that too is um it's something that I never thought of just reading the books, watching the movies, but so what do you think of Frodo going to the Undying Lands yet still like passing away, I guess, still dying essentially, like, so if you have other characters like Sam who goes there, I guess the idea is that like the only ones who truly live forever in the Undying Lands are the elves because they are immortal. Apparently, it's something from Morgoth's Ring that Tolkien was saying this about Frodo, that when he does get there, um, he actually wouldn't live forever because he is basically human. Have you heard that before? Or like come across that? I don't know.
No, I think that there is, when Tolkien dies, he leaves behind a million words or of this endless sort of backstories and ideas, and his son Christopher Tolkien puts these ideas together, produces the unfinished books, and so there are ideas that you're not going to find in the trilogy, you're not going to see in the movie. I mean, because Tolkien looks at this from a very Christian worldview and views, as I said before, he unconsciously writes a Christian story. He doesn't want to write a Christian story. It's unconscious that the faith that is so deep in Tolkien expresses himself. So my view is that the afterlife, the undying lands, that Frodo is going to be rewarded for what he has done, and I think this is something perhaps we don't look at, is Gollum, in a strange way, is rewarded with peace, just to be destroyed from the horror of this continual existence. The ring keeps him alive for longer, but he is nothing like the original Spiegel. He's now this horrific person, creature thing that is despicable in his being, despicable in every way. It's a horror to be alive. So when he dies with the ring, there is that freedom from the horror that he's become. And I think the opposite would be true with Frodo. I mean, I haven't read exactly these things about it, but I think Tolkien would say there is a reward at the end of it, if the reward is just peace.
No, yeah, like you were saying too. There are so many different notes and extra stuff that like Christopher Tolkien was able to put together. Um, that like you have multiple versions of stories, and um, like there's a, like if it was meant to be like known in the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien would have put it in there if it was really important. I guess, but so there's a lot of different stuff, like the UKS could pick up. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that all of it is necessarily relevant to needing to understand Lord of the Rings and how the story goes.
I mean, it's not a story about heaven. It's a story about the battles of this earth, that there are battles to be fought, that there is evil that is present. The ring represents, according to Tolkien's letters, that complete desire to control, dominate, and manipulate. But it only serves one master, so it serves evil. And remember that Tolkien always says that nothing was created evil, it was all created good, and evil can't create things, it can only corrupt it. So we know that Tolkien wanted to write a lot more. The problem that Tolkien has is that he's so thorough and he's so detailed. This is a man who's the professor at Anglo-Saxon, so he's an expert on ancient myths and stories. He's an expert on languages. He's an expert on the Nordic myths, religions, beliefs. And him and C.S. Lewis will stay up to the early hours of the morning, 3 a.m., discussing these things and the influence on how they reflect some truths of Christ. Because when a missionary goes to a pagan culture, they don't go there and point the finger and say, everything you believe is evil. They build a bridge between their culture and beliefs to Christ. And in a sense, Tolkien is trying to do that and saying, right now we're here to live on this earth, and there are things that are good, that are worth fighting for. There are evil things that we must resist. And by getting close to God, we can know what the goodness is and what the evil is by reading the Bible and listening to the Gandalfs, the people who have been sent by God to direct, whether it be the preacher, the prophet, and testing those things and fighting that battle. It's not ultimately a story about heaven. I mean, one of the incredible things about the Bible is we're told very little actually about heaven. Christ says you will be like the angels. We're told there'll be no more suffering or pain. We're not going to be sat on clouds playing harps, which is this idea that was created to fill the void. Actually, it's very complex. I mean, you can see behind me in my book, The End Times, the book of Revelation, when I look into it, it's a very complex thing. Tolkien's looking onto to Earth and saying there's a story that's taking place in the world of Middle-earth, in the mythological, ancient, pre-Christian England, before Roman England, the biblical age. So we have nothing there. And he says, this is the mythology. And there are things like worm tongue, which is very interesting, even though he doesn't link up to Frodo. Wormtongue is there to discourage, to lie, to deceive, to break down your confidence, to create a situation where you can't see good from evil and you're confused. In Old English, wormtongue means serpent tongue. So Tolkien is going back to the Garden of Eden, lying, deceiving, tricking you. The point of it is to keep you in cobwebs, to keep you bound and confused and lost. And actually, many people can feel like that in their lives many times. And what the thing that's going to break that is the prophetic word, the presence of God in the book. It's Gandalf's power. Gandalf the White returns in resurrection power, mirroring Christ. And he's going to play that role in helping the great battles. Meanwhile, Frodo is on his quest on another story. Ultimately, right now, right here, we have to face the struggle of fighting for all that is noble and true, to get the gospel out, to live out the life of Christ, to let the life of Christ be expressed in us and through us. And Tolkien sort of leaves heaven alone in that sense. And it's in the same way Lewis very much does the same. When Aslan's country, you don't see a great deal of that enduring eternal, because the mystery is so great. I mean, what does it mean? You will be like the angels. We study all the angels in the Bible and you get an idea of something like that, but you're never going to see. The Bible says we know in part, we see in part until the fullness is revealed. Tolkien's mysteries and unanswered questions are there. And the reason that he wasn't able to publish the other works that he had in preparation was simply because that world was so mapped out and so complex that how do you finish the unfinishable? I mean, it was a miracle, because he was going to, as I said before, he was going to give up on the Lord of the Rings. And Lewis says to him, don't give up, fight for this, go through, finish the work, publish the work. They're great friends in the Special Inklings Club, where they meet at the Eagle and Child, the Eastgate Hotel at Oxford. They meet at Lewis's house, specifically Tolkien and Lewis, where they read the first manuscripts of Lord of the Rings, etc. And Tolkien is looking for guidance and advice from Lewis. And Lewis's greatest guidance is basically just keep going. There's something to be done. And the Inklings group, Hugo Dyson's one of them, Christopher Tolkien is a young man who gets to sit on it. They're important because they've sold 500 million books between them, which is completely spectacular. So they've captured the culture in that way. I mean, the most powerful people in the world are sharing Tolkien quotes about the challenges on the earth today. So that you can see the importance of that. Christians leading into Narnia and C.S. Lewis, because the parallels are so easy to understand, but there's a bridge that has been built with people who are not believers into the world of Tolkien, and then they get surprised to find this man is a man of incredibly deep faith. He believes profoundly, and it controls the transformation of his own soul. The one difference between Lewis and Tolkien is Lewis is very evangelical. He wants to go out and preach and teach and explain this is what it all means. Whereas Tolkien is a bit more withdrawn. His biographers say perhaps he was just a little bit more quieter and so in depth in the language, because the Lord of the Rings, obviously there's the Hobbit, which was written for his children, but it really begins in the language, the ancient language. I mean, who do you know who creates a language?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. Uh, or even like a language that works as well as Tolkien's does, for sure. Um, yeah, no. That's It's been a great conversation, and it's like one thing that's great about Middle Earth in general, especially Lord of the Rings, is how we can tie it back to our own world and our own experiences, and I think it kind of makes it more relatable. And those I mean the Christian themes, like in my opinion, are really like the foundation to it all. And you may not see it, but they're but still it's there for sure.
They're very deep. They're on a deep level to encourage to continue to walk in that. Each person has this great moral choice to make. Frodo, despite his challenges, ultimately passes the test because the burden that he has to carry is bigger and greater than everybody else's.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks, Paul, for coming on
Been
and
great.
talking about this. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. I appreciate your insights. Yeah. Every Everybody who comes on just always has, a different take, different side of things that they like talking about. So, this has been good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Flip.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you for our next episode next week.